Welcome everyone. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Thanks for spending your lunch with me. So we're going to get started in a minute, and in the chat, I am going to post a link to the PowerPoint. So there's links in there and resources and homework. And if you have to leave early and you want to watch this later, it's being recorded. Welcome to Affordable Housing Week with Housing Development Consortium. I'm Laura Lowe from Share the Cities, and I hope you're all having an okay day. It's very windy. I'm worried about power outages, so fingers crossed. There's a few more people being admitted, so we're going to wait to start. I think we had about 60 folks registered and about 30 folks are here so far, so. Let me fix the access on my link. Thanks, Zoe, for letting me know. So we have a range of folks here, some who know a lot about zoning and some folks that are brand new, and this might be the first time they are learning about it. So it's Zoning 101. I'm going to go through a lot of basics. For those of you that know a lot, think of it as like a train the trainer, where maybe I'll give you some like tools or ideas to train your staff or folks around you or people in your life about zoning. So we're up to about 40 folks, and I'm gonna give it about 30 more seconds before I start. So once again, thank you for coming. Okay, and I want to thank Emma in the background from HDC who's helping out. And if you have technical questions, you can send a direct message to Emma, and that would be really great if you get stuck on something. We are going to have a point here where we have some breakout sessions, and those are optional. And we'll get to that in about 15-20 minutes. And I think we're about ready to get started. Is that okay, Emma? Okay. I'm going to share my screen. I've also sent you the link to so let's see.
And when we're getting started, just really quickly, if you want to use closed captioning, just there should be an option on the lower taskbar, and you just go to the closed captioning option, press the little arrow in the corner, and press show subtitles, and that should work. But if not, just message me and I'll help.
Okay, everyone, so let's get started. We have about an hour of information and 15 minutes for Q&A, and I might be going too fast, so please let me know if I am. So this is Zoning 101 and how to take action to fix it, and I'm Laura Lowe, and I started in an organizing collective called Share the Cities a few years ago. We are not a nonprofit. We operate fairly independently and have some support from Patreon donors. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting model of organizing. And Housing Development Consortium is a group that we often partner with. They do fantastic work for affordable housing advocacy and community education around more than just affordable housing, just how do we get to affordable cities? So capital A affordable housing and lowercase affordable housing. You can follow along on Twitter this week with the hashtag AHW2020 and Know Your Zone. There's also a scavenger hunt, and there's some really wonderful events coming up that help folks to understand why we don't have enough affordable housing and our cities are not affordable. So hopefully a lot of you went last night to the event. So I want to do a land acknowledgement. A lot of you are probably familiar with this, but if you're new to it, a land acknowledgement, we are all from different parts of Seattle and Washington State, and there might even be some folks out of state that are watching this. But I am on Duwamish land, the first people of Seattle, and we want to honor the land that we're on and acknowledge it. And there's different ways that you can do that. One of the ways that you can honor the land you're on is by visiting the Longhouse in Seattle or visiting a local cultural center in your community. The Longhouse is fantastic. I just visited there recently. You can pay rent if you can afford to real rent Duwamish, and you can look up what land you're on. And there's a slide I'm not going to read here that talks about that land acknowledgements are an Indigenous practice, and that you know, we need to be mindful when we're doing it, that we're also co-opting and adopting a practice. So this is kind of the schedule for today. We're going to talk about zoning memes, missing middle, who share the cities. We're going to have a housing history discussion and breakout rooms. We're going to get into like deeper what zoning is, talk about building style and housing choice. We're going to talk about community exclusion and health disparities and climate change. And then the last kind of like 20, 30 minutes, we're going to really talk about organizing strategies. So community organizing strategies and how I've taken action to fix zoning. It doesn't mean there's not other ways. It's just the ways that I've kind of like my recipe. A really important book that I recommend is called Bicycle Race, Transportation Culture and Resistance. For anyone doing community organizing on any issue, this book really gets into some of the dynamics between nonprofits and community grassroots advocates around who has power in these discussions around land use changes. It's super intersectional on race and issues of gender. And it is a book about transportation, but you know, I've heard Alex Hudson at Transportation Choices Coalition say this, and I've said it too, that transportation and housing are like peanut butter and jelly. So you can't really talk about one without the other. And so it's good to have a real deep understanding of how transportation policy is happening so that you can make sure that the land use and the transportation policy kind of are gelling, because a lot of times they're not. So highly recommend that book. And here's a meme. So Neighbors for More Neighbors is a Minnesota group, and you can't always tell if he believes in single family zoning. You have two folks here giving each other a hug, and they're probably a couple. If he mentions neighborhood character, it's time to talk about zoning. If he starts to gripe about renters not contributing to the neighborhood, it's time to talk about zoning. So if you go to public hearings around zoning, you'll hear people talk about, you know, new buildings are going to destroy the character of my neighborhood. New neighbors, I heard this in Everett in a conversation around affordable housing. New neighbors aren't going to contribute to the neighborhood. I heard this from the Queen Anne Community Council around backyard cottages. Renters just don't care. They don't garden as much. So those are times that you kind of like know that it's time to have a conversation about single family zoning. This is kind of a funny one. You know the signs if your teen is texting, tweeting about city planning, BRB, build residential buildings, OG, original gentrifier, AF, affordable funds. So hopefully none of this is too offensive, but using humor to talk about zoning is important because it's a really dry subject. I used to be a middle school math teacher, And I would bring in songs and music and try to make it super fun, so people wouldn't, check out of the conversation. ZOMG, zoning out my grandma, kind of rude, but kind of sticks with you. Here's another one. 1 in 2 affordable housing advocates will call for downzoning by the age of 55. Most will not know it. Get yourself talking about zoning today. I wrote an article called How to Talk to Your NIMBY Parents, and I don't really like the word NIMBY, but I've had really deep conversations with my parents who are in their 70s and 80s in California around zoning in Santa Monica and now zoning kind of in the Bay Area where they live. And it's really important to not insult people, but also to like hold people accountable when you're having conversations about some of the misconceptions around zoning. And there is a generational disconnect that you can see in who shows up to zoning meetings, unfortunately. Not always true. We have a lot of wonderful advocates across Seattle region that are older folks. Here is one of my favorite things, and I highly recommend all of you find this online and print it out and mail it to all of your electeds. I've done that before on Valentine's Day. I've sent Valentines to all of my electeds. Roses are red, moonroofs are cool. I'm rezoning my heart. Its missing middle is you. So this missing middle diagram was kind of made famous by Opticos, and this was adapted by Neighbors for More Neighbors again. And it's just showing kind of all the housing diversity in our cities. Single detached residential, which we have unfortunately called single family housing, single family zoning, triplexes and fourplexes, bungalow courts. Bungalow courts are some of my favorite housing because I'm a gardener, townhouses, etc. So highly recommend this as a strategy to kind of, electeds love getting thank you notes. They love getting praise. They love hearing that they're doing a good job, because really a lot of their day is actually like harsh people yelling and death threats, and like it's pretty awful. So they love hearing positive things. Here is more missing middle. So Strong Towns has a missing middle for commercial, which I thought is really great. And I love hand illustrated drawings. This is especially interesting in light of the pandemic. Some of these kind of in between options for commercial. Pods, micro rental, small retail. I love corner stores. And then down here is a version of the Opticos missing middle in the style of periodic table of elements of housing. Super creative. I also, someone else made a tarot deck with different missing middle housing. There's a lot of people doing creative stuff around housing advocacy, which I love when there's art and music and other things involved. So when we talk about zoning, we're not just talking about residential use, we're talking about industrial, we're talking about commercial and other uses. So if you didn't attend last night, I'd go back and watch it. So why was zoning invented and what have been the consequences of zoning? So last night was a deep, deep dive into that. And it was The Color of Law, which is a book that I listened recently to on audiobooks. And it was just, I was literally yelling at my speaker. And yeah, it'll get you real angry. It's a legal case for basically land use reparations because of the state-sanctioned segregation that happened from zoning. And so this isn't really like a history of zoning that we're going to do today, but last night was the history of zoning and the impacts of zoning. But for those of you that don't know, zoning didn't always exist, and part of the reason it exists, a big reason it exists, is to segregate Black and white folks, and it has generational consequences, current impacts, and in some cases, you can see that it's still being used across the country to keep people segregated by class and by race. And it has all sorts of impacts on access to schools, access to trees, to parks, to amenities like libraries. And it's just, the consequences are endless and infuriating. And the more you learn about it, the more angry you're going to get. So yes, be ready to get angry and take action. And then down below is a super cute picture that the city of Seattle has, I think, on their renting site that I love. I love that picture of cities. A lot of times we see pictures of cities without people in them, and that's not good. Try to take pictures of people in your cities. Okay, so a fun part about zoning is that zoning change is scary. So here we have a like Halloween themed sign, and we have, this was the Wallingford Community Council, and I'm not trying to pick on them. They have some great folks there. They've been advocating recently for tiny house villages, and they are welcoming sometimes for their community. So I don't want to just say bad things about them. But during the fight for the Hala Up zones, they took a very extreme, in my sense, view on it and used fear. And I don't really appreciate when people use fear to make their point. And you could see these signs still, if you walk through the neighborhood in Wallingford, people still have their Hala sign up, right? This has been decided. We got up zones in certain parts of Seattle. Really just like 11% of Seattle got rezoned. And the sign, you know, it's like the bulldozers are coming and this family is going to get eaten up along with the house. Their dog's in danger. I mean, this is an extremely emotional sign. And this is kind of when you go to a land use meeting, this is kind of the atmosphere, right? There's a lot of fear language. There's a lot of fear of destruction and change. And so you just have to be ready that there's going to be people around you that are in a heightened emotional state and not really going to respond to a logical conversation. Like you can't sit there and start talking about data when people are scared. So data is important, but it's not going to get the conversation to go well, in my experience. So as we discuss zoning, I want you to think about how it impacts all these other things: public health, climate change mitigation, community exclusion, tenant rights, houselessness, LGBTQIA+ rights, voter representation, disability rights, global real estate investment, gentrification, food security, police state violence. If you read The Color of Law, there is a direct line between zoning and police state violence. In order to maintain zoning and to keep folks segregated, police came in and killed people and put them in jail for trying to desegregate. And there's a direct line there. Indigenous sovereignty, you know, yesterday was Indigenous Peoples Day, and school segregation is what got the author of Color of Law really interested in zoning. He was working on school segregation and just for impacts in the achievement gaps, and eventually kind of fell into zoning as a root cause of achievement gaps that we see between Black and white students. Okay, so we are not going to cover today all these really juicy things that I love talking about. We're not going to talk about tax incentives for homeownership. We're not going to talk about disability justice. We're not going to talk about predatory development. We're not even really going to get into racial covenants and racist redlining, because I decided to kind of not do as much history and really talk about more the nuts and bolts of zoning. But if you are going to advocate on this topic, please know that kind of a zoning 201 would cover some of these other issues. Cooperatives, I'm not going to get to that today. So lots of really good stuff that will make our cities better and that make our cities worse to be like digested. So Share the Cities, who is that? That's me, but it's also like 150 people that take action together. It's also a newsletter that goes out to 500 folks. It's also a community that I've kind of curated on Twitter with 6,000 followers, and I've blocked a lot of people, and then I've kept the people that teach me things that I learn from, that, you know, keep me from burning out. And so that's Share the Cities as a few different things. So a newsletter, a working group, and a Twitter community. This is some of the folks that I've taken action with, either in a coalition. At the bottom, you can see me in coalition with the Mercer Mega Black Alliance, with some folks from Transit Riders Union and 350 Seattle. Some folks that I canvassed with, I'm holding up a clipboard, my thumbs up, and that's some folks we knocked on doors for about 80 hours around Jackson Park Golf Course to ask folks kind of what they'd want to see at the golf course instead and how they plan to get to future light rail. There was a safe street march. Safe streets advocacy and land use are really critical to work together. And yeah, so this is some of the other stuff we've worked on. We did hall advocacy, golf course stuff, education workshops, backyard cottages. I'm really super into industrial lands right now. There's 2 of us that are working on it, but anyone else who wants to join us. There's industrial lands planning going on in Seattle that a lot of people are not following. And then Tulare, not gonna get into that today, but Tulare is a land parcel that's kind of the quintessential example of bad zoning. And so that's some of the stuff that we've done. There's some articles that you can look into later. Radio interview with me and Sean Scott and this guy who's a news sports guy talking about golf courses. It was an interesting conversation. And there's a lot of conversations in Toronto, in Los Angeles around golf courses. City zone golf courses, is that really the best use in a housing crisis? Pretty controversial. You'd think it would be, I would think that it would be obvious that like we shouldn't have 4 public golf courses in Seattle and that some of that land could be new open space or a mix of new open space and some other options. So I'm gonna stop sharing for a minute and see if there's any questions in the chat. If you have any questions so far, you can post them and I will read them out loud. And our next step is gonna be a housing history guided discussion. So I'm gonna have everyone like close their eyes, think about their own housing history and really dive into like the housing types you've lived in and how that's impacted what neighborhoods you've lived in. And for some folks, it might be kind of traumatic. So I've done this activity with folks who've had like a lot of like trauma around housing. So if you want to mute your, if you want to mute this for like 10 minutes and not be a part of that and kind of like check out for 10 minutes, I totally understand if you have a lot of trauma around housing. Yeah, it's the next step that we're gonna do. Okay, so I want everyone to kind of put your feet on the floor and sit up and get comfortable and close your eyes. And I want you to think about where you live now. And, you know, we've all spent more than enough time in our homes over the last few months. And think about where you lived before that. And think about how before versus now, you know, do you have different access to things, different access to a library, different access to grocery stores, different access to parks, transit, and all the things that people like about cities, different access to your friends, your cultural institutions, and think about where you lived before that. And same thing, think about kind of your mental map of your neighborhood and your community and how it either gave you more or less access to those things. A lot of times moves happen for not great reasons. They happen because of life transitions. Sometimes they're really great life transitions, like new partnerships or new jobs, new babies. Sometimes they happen for sad reasons. Loss of income, eviction, and other things. So life transitions definitely usually guide a housing change. And then I want you to go back to like the first place you ever lived and, you know, how that influenced, you know, there's a saying or shorthand of like, you know, what zip code you're born into impacts a lot of your life in terms of generational wealth and health and access to different opportunities. So it's good to think about, not always a fun thing to think about. And then go back before that and think about where your parents grew up. What kind of houses did they live in? What kind of apartments did they live in? Did they have housing insecurity? So sometimes there's a lot of generational housing trauma that exists for families, and that can very much influence public policy views around zoning. Okay, I am going to stop sharing. I think I did. So I'm going to have you go into breakout sessions. So when you're in your breakout session, I want you to say your name and your pronouns, and be mindful of like the space you're taking up, especially if you're from like a historically privileged community. You know, make sure that you're allowing everyone in the space to speak, and take about a minute each and share like your housing history, or like the transitions and access to different things in your community. You know, like I moved and now I hate my bus stop, for example. Like it doesn't have to be some deep, dark, like group therapy thing, but like, so Emma's gonna break you into sessions, and feel free to reach out to Emma or me during that if there's any problems, and we're gonna come back and meet in like about 8 minutes. So take some time, get to know each other. And thanks, Emma posted in the chat, names, pronouns, share your housing history, transitions, and access to things in your community. So good luck.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Tiernan. We're actually in breakout rooms right now, so I don't know if you want to hop into one, or we're just kind of chilling out in the lobby, waiting for folks to reconvene. Just let me know what you'd like to do. Hi.
Hey, I've got to go to work. Sorry.
Oh, okay. See you around. Bye.
Welcome back, everyone. I know that the end of breakout sessions can be really hurried and rushed and difficult, so I hope that some of you saw the warning. But I apologize because we're all still learning how to Zoom. And I know for some of you that was your first breakout session. I like meeting with people in community, in person, and sharing meals with people. Those are all challenges during this time. So hopefully for some of you, the breakout session was a positive experience. And if anyone wants to share their, not someone else's, but their feedback, you're welcome to post it in the chat for everyone. And for some people, they're saying they don't see the chat. So I'm sorry about that. So if you have any feedback about your housing history and how that influences your public policy lens, I know I shared that, like, I lived many places in my life in many different dwellings, but it wasn't till I lived for a long time in like that missing middle housing when I lived in Chicago that when I moved to Seattle and all of a sudden that was gone, that definitely impacted my public policy lens. So I'm gonna go back to Taryn. Do you have something to say? Are we gonna mute everyone? I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, we're at 12:40. I'm gonna try not to go too fast, but I am gonna start going a little faster. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up? Okay. So this is just the housing history, like the questions, so that if you want to go back to them later. I also want to tell everyone here, you can steal any of this. Like, this is not my like proprietary stuff. I want people to have knowledge. This is like open source learning. Steal it, borrow it. You can give me credit if you want, but feel free. So zoning 101, that's why you're all here. So at its most basic, it's a set of rules that tell builders what they can build, right? So basic zoning, right? That's a really neutral statement, a set of rules that tell builders what they can build. I'm not a neutral person. I'm an activist, I'm an organizer, I'm biased, not neutral, angry, right? Productively angry. So we can take this definition and pick it apart all day. But it is, at the end of the day, if you were like a city planner, that's what you would describe zoning as, probably. This is another thought, some thought questions. What did the city look like 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 25 years ago? Who controlled the decisions around land? How are those decisions controlled throughout history? How are they controlled right now? And then for each of you, if you had a magic wand, what would the city look like ideally 50 years from now or 100 years from now? What barriers stand in the way of your ideal city? And really, this is super important, especially for those of you that work at nonprofits and have like a lot of decision-making power. Who has the right to control the decisions around the future of our city, right? So that's a really deep, important question when we're talking about zoning, is who gets to decide the future? So what do you know about zoning already? Some basics. The committee at Seattle City Council has gone through some name changes right now. It's the Land Use and Neighborhoods Committee. It used to be the PLUS Committee. So, you know, tracking this stuff, it's like endless acronyms. It's a nightmare. But every city has a land use body that makes decisions. So try to know who that is and subscribe to their updates and put it in your calendar and try to watch it on Seattle Channel or whatever your local access channel is. The department at the city of Seattle, it used to be one department, and now it's sort of two. There's the SDCI, Seattle Department of Construction and Inspections, which is like the permitting part, and then there's the Office of Planning and Community Development that does some of the big like outreach and visioning. So that's kind of annoying, in my opinion. That's a recent change. And so you have two departments that you have to like track and get emails from and follow on social media about zoning. Super annoying. And I highly recommend that you do the Housing Development Consortium scavenger hunt. So if you want to drop that in the chat, everyone should look at that PDF and it'll walk you through educating yourself about your neighborhood and your land use and who to connect with. It's a really cool scavenger hunt that I had nothing to do with. That's awesome. Here is one of my favorite illustrations. So we have Bay Area artist, Alfred, who did oneplex, duplex, triplex, fourplex, right? So super cool illustrations. This is also the person that has done the housing tarot cards that you can, I think you can purchase them. A phrase that I came up with for Missing Middle is 4 floors and corner stores. And if you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that I like to tweet bodega cats like all the time. I think bodega cats are rad. People complain every day when I tweet. They're like, this is disgusting. There should be cats next to food. And I'm like, they're so cute. Like, I'm sorry. But everything's controversial on Twitter, right? Like bodega cats are controversial. But a bodega is a corner store. And when I was a little kid, I lived in the woods in New York, but we would go down to New York City in the 80s. And I had a lot of great memories of corner stores. My parents were very strict about candy, but when we were in New York in this city, I got to go to a corner store and get candy. There's some townhomes and some backyard cottages. The one on the right is Cast Architecture, Matt Hutchins. And I did a lot of backyard cottage advocacy. And there's 2 right there. There's like the cool metal one, and then there's that blue one. So kind of different, real different styles of backyard cottages. On the left here, we have Capitol Hill co-housing image that I stole from their website. Everyone should visit capitolhillurbancohousing.org. Grace Kim, who's on, I believe, the HDC board, is the architect of this along with other folks. And this is also where Grace lives. And it's a beautiful community and a beautiful building. And there's garden on the roof. And I got to tour it once and it's so rad. And it's kind of the exception that proves the rule. Like we would all like this Capitol Hill co-housing situation, but learning the story of how hard it was to get it is a good learning case study of all the things we need to change so that we could have a lot more of those. And then on the right, we have something, Cicely owned all of this property, and there's all these abandoned buildings by Roosevelt High School in Seattle. And, you know, those abandoned buildings were a huge source of conversation in land use planning and drove a lot of the emotional side of the conversation. And when I started engaging in Roosevelt around land use, I didn't really know about these buildings or the history of them, and made a lot of mistakes in my conversations with neighbors around this. And so I'm just saying, you know, try to know the history of what's gone on in your neighborhood when you're talking to your neighbors about zoning. Here's a picture of I believe it's the 5th and Virginia project. And I'm going to talk about that later, but you know, there's lots of different ways to live. People that live in high rises are good neighbors too. We like to think of the good neighbor in the single family home that's lived there for 30 years, but there's good neighbors in high rises too. Raising their families, it's not just single people, there's people with kids in high rises too. Another thing I want you all to look up after this is the sight line. I don't know. Is everyone muted? I don't know. So in Wallingford, we have an urban village here. The boundaries are in black around, and the black boundary is the urban village boundary. There's a proposed reduction here that the Wallingford Community Council, I showed you their kind of angry poster earlier. They wanted a real small rezone. And for some of you, this might be the first time that you're looking at a map that's indicating zoning. So let's walk through it. So all of the stuff in yellow is single family. Then you kind of have like a peachish color is low rise and a darker color for low rise 2, low rise 3. Low rise 1, 2, and 3 are sort of like your different townhomes. And then neighborhood commercial is a kind of zoning for maybe lower rise commercial. I don't actually know the exact definition of that. And then commercial. I'm sure somebody on here could jump in the chat and define those better than I am. But for zoning 101, to not get into too much detail, this is the kind of stuff that people get real nerdy about and want to dive into and talk about. So getting really familiar with these kinds of diagrams is a barrier for people to participate in land use conversations. It's a huge barrier because a lot of people look at this and maybe their brain doesn't like maps, or it might be really hard for them to understand how this relates to what they see when they go down the commercial strip in Wallingford. And so just be really, really be careful that people come with different learning challenges and different spatial awareness challenges, and they may not be getting it because they hate new neighbors. They might be not getting it because they don't understand and can't translate maps into three-dimensional space. So there's a lot of different barriers to talking about zoning. This is something all of you should know about, whether you live in Seattle or not. Africatown Seattle and King County Equity Now. I've included the websites on there. Please visit them. The Liberty Bank project is sort of like Capitol Hill co-housing, where it's like the exception that proves the rule, and studying how Liberty Bank finally got made is a good lesson in all of the barriers to building affordable, equitable housing. In both cases, they're both case studies in like all of the barriers, all the hoops that you have to jump through financially, community-wise, design-wise, logistics. Like Capitol Co-housing wanted to do like a big cistern, and just the costs were so prohibitive for like green building. Like you can just dig into these as really juicy examples and learn so much from them. So some basic definitions: comp plan and the GMA. So you'll hear a lot about comp plans. In Seattle, we have a comp plan going on right now for our industrial lands in the next 2 years, and then the 2 years after that will be our big comp plan update. And those happen periodically and under the Washington State Growth Management Act. If you move to another city or another state, not every state has a Growth Management Act. We're actually really lucky we have that from a climate standpoint, in my opinion. It directs growth to certain areas. It preserves farms, it preserves forests, it preserves industrial land, and it tries to direct cities to make better land use decisions. It's not working right now. So if you want to fix it, please take action with FutureWise, Washington Can't Wait campaign. There's going to be a big action the week of November 16th. I'm going to be plugging that a few times. So if you have to leave early, please sign up for Washington Can't Wait campaign, get their updates and take action. That's kind of the best thing we can do right now in our region around zoning. So it's kind of a big overarching plan that guides the way cities make their plans. And so the city's plan is called a comp plan. The GMA impacts and frames what gets studied for that. I'm oversimplifying this quite a bit for those of you that are like way wonkier than me. But, and then we have a comp plan coming up in Seattle. That'll be the next chance that we have a big opportunity to change zoning. And we're at 12:50. Thank you for all of you for sticking with this. So zoning's a set of rules that tell builders what they can build. Builders like to look at that through the lens of like how much profit they can get, like what's going to pencil out, what they can do. There's a lot of unpredictability in the system. There's a Seattle for Everyone workshop this week for Affordable Housing Week that's going to be talking about the barriers to building. Highly recommend you attend that. You know, when we have unpredictability in our systems, we could have the best zoning on earth, but if we have like really weird design review and weird other things limiting it, we're not going to have affordable cities or equitable cities. Okay, finally, a zoning map. So here we have Seattle on the right here. It's yellow, everything in yellow is single family houses, which for years now, Councilmember Mosqueda and the Planning Commission have been trying to get renamed residential zoning. So please write to your legislators and ask them to make that change, and ask the OPCD and SDCI departments to make that change to residential, because as Councilmember Mosqueda mentioned last night in the kickoff for Affordable Housing Week, it's just not true. Like the definition of what a family is and who lives in what type of housing It's just not a good word. It just has a lot of like coding there that's just not fair. So change it to residential. The yellow is residential zoning. The green allows apartments. Apartments are banned. So hopefully everyone has their sound off and they're muted, but I want everyone to say out loud to yourself in your work or your apartment or whatever, like, apartments are banned in all of the yellow part of Seattle, like just banned, like not allowed, illegal, right? So just really think about that in terms of who's getting a reserved spot in our city when you have apartments banned in all of the yellow parts there on that map. Who's being prioritized? It's like a restaurant where there's like all these like VIP tables, or there's like a reserve sign. Like that's literally what we're doing to people that want to move into our city. Another resource that's just amazing is this polymetrics.com/blog/zoning laws. It's just amazing. It really breaks down exactly what zoning is. And it talks about what is commercial, what is mixed use, what is industrial, and that's kind of like a good basic starting point for the kind of dry basics. So the part on the right, if it's not getting you angry, please reach out so that I can get you angry about it. And the part on the left is kind of the very basics, like the terms. So land use is really wonky and really gatekeepery, so with all of the terms. Here's another map of everything in blue here, single family housing, AKA residential, AKA like reserved for just people that have a spare $50,000 or $100,000 to put down as a down payment on a home. There are renters that rent in single family zones. It's not the majority though. I did rent a single family home for years in the U District, but it's majority of this is landowners that are more wealthy. Here, let's go back for a minute. So 83% of the city, no proposed upzones, 16% of the city, urban villages. I'm going to talk about this later. And if you read Color of Law and we're talking about redlining, there's a big overlap between redlining, which was a banking practice that discriminated against Black folks and other folks. And there's a lot of overlap with our zoning map and discrimination around lending. Here is one of my favorite images. Myra Lahr is an artist, and they made this some years back during the HALA Housing Affordability and Livability Agenda conversation. And I just wanted to show you all of that. But it's kind of how they felt about our land use patterns. It's an image of somebody kind of kneeling, and they have like a tornado swirling around of different, maybe different housing types or something, the conversation in their head. And then it says, to share the city, we need zoning reform now, more urban villages, infill development, duplexes, residential small lots, and backyard cottages. All our growth happens in the 11%. And this is true for many, many, many cities. This is not a Seattle thing. Like, we could be talking about Portland, we could be talking about Toronto, we could be talking about Minnesota or Minneapolis. Here's something super wonky. So this is kind of like a little like bonus to a one word, but FAR is floor area ratio. I see some of you smiling. So floor area ratio is super, super, super hard to understand. But Matt Hutchins from Cast Architecture and more has demonstrated this with Legos. But it's really important when we talk about density and adding capacity and adding height limits and changing the zoning and up zones. It's really important for us to understand floor area ratio. So it's sort of like a volume thing. So if you were good at geometry, awesome, you're gonna understand FAR. If geometry was hard for you and like volume's really hard for you, this is gonna be a struggle. But basically FAR works either in a good way or not a great way with zoning, and it can help get us more tree canopy saved, more green space around our buildings. So the higher we can go and the more FAR we allow, there's other factors too, but this definitely is a really important concept that lots and lots of people have trouble understanding. But when we're making zoning changes, we're actually talking about FAR changes too. And when you look at the mandatory housing affordability rules and you start trying to understand the way developers have to like pay an in lieu fee or build affordable housing, a lot of the stuff is about FAR. And so if I never told you that word before and you started digging into this stuff, you would be like, what? Like, how could she not even mention that? So I'm not expecting you to get it today, but I do want you to hear it for the first time so that the next time you hear it, your brain will like latch onto it more. And there's a whole Wikipedia page about FAR. That's how nerdy this is. So the work that I do, it's 12:57. We're gonna go about 15 more minutes. I'm gonna go real fast through this. How long do you have to live somewhere to have an opinion? What if you wanna live there, but you're priced out before you can even live there? Do you get to have a say? Who has a right to the city? Who has a right on any cities? What's authentic? Who gets to judge who's the authentic voice of the community? Really difficult questions, but really important. Here is the community of Escala. They live downtown. They didn't want the building at 5th and Virginia I showed you earlier. This is a design review meeting. They hired former council member Peter Steinbrück, who's now at the ports, to represent them. They talked about their dog Sugar, who was gonna lose a patch of light. They brought in doctors to talk about losing light was gonna make them all have depression. They spent years fighting this. They didn't want it all came down to the fact that they thought their alley was too small and too crowded and that their deliveries were going to get messed up. And so when you go to meetings and this is who you're dealing with, people that are living in $1 million condos fighting new housing, and you add that up across the whole country, it's part of the reason that we have a housing shortage. So I'm not saying that these people are bad or that they're not, that Sugar the dog shouldn't have his light. But you add that up and multiply that across all of our cities, and it sure eventually leads to part of the reason that we have a homelessness crisis in most of our cities. So these people don't know that, and this isn't the moment to tell them, because again, when they're angry in the meeting isn't really a good time to like have a conversation with them. But this radicalized me. This meeting radicalized me. I was very angry. And you can look online and see my tweets about it. Hashtag 50 Shades of Stupid, because this is the 50 Shades of Gray building. So yeah, 50 Shades of Stupid for real. Community exclusion, zoning hurts people. It hurts people that are fighting for racial justice, disability justice, economic justice, language justice, people who want better tenant rights, rights of people without housing, indigenous sovereignty, LGBTQIA rights, and more. So when you start talking about zoning, we're talking about all these groups that need equity, not getting it. If we had time, I would go into a whole thing about climate. I've been fighting around climate issues my entire life. I came to housing around climate. 350 Seattle does amazing work, as does Sierra Club and Sightline, and many other environmental groups, FutureWise, Forterra. So there's a lot of folks connecting the dots between climate and housing and environmental justice and health disparities. Puget Sound Sage, Got Green. These are all groups in Washington you should know about that are connecting the dots between zoning and health disparities and climate change and environmental justice. And food justice, food deserts. I just kind of want you, when you're thinking about zoning, knowing that you're actually talking about all these other things. Taking action. Okay, everyone do a stretch. Get ready to take action. Got 15 more minutes. We can make it in. So start small, take naps. Seriously, take naps. Those land use meetings are a nightmare. You want to take naps before and after them. Make friends, because people will be mean to you. So it's good to have friends and buddies there that can be like, can you believe someone just said that to me in line for this meeting? And grow things, grow relationships, grow partnerships, grow coalitions, grow tomatoes. I'm a gardener. I have a balcony garden in my apartment in Northwest Queen Anne, and I love it. It faces west. I grow amazing tomatoes on it because it stays hot all night. Go slow, listen more than you talk. Find shared values. If you click on that link in the Google Doc, you'll go to the Sound Alliance leadership training. Sound Alliance does trainings for community organizers. They do a lot of faith organizing, union organizing. I took a training years ago with them, and they do relational organizing, and they really teach you what does it mean to find out if you have shared values. If there's even like a hope that you and this other organization or you and this other person are going to be able to move forward and make change together or not. You really need to be honest that you can't change every mind. I block a lot of people on social media. I block people on Twitter, on Facebook, on Nextdoor. There's just some people that like are like, I'm never going to make any progress, and they're just taking my energy away, and I don't want to burn out. And when I block someone, it doesn't mean I don't like them or that like I wouldn't be friends with them or whatever. It just means like we're done here. Like I just can't even move forward. You want to talk about apartment bans and housing choices. You don't want to use the word zoning. So we're using the word zoning here today. There's a new podcast out, KQED in San Francisco. And in their very first podcast, they talk about how they were going to try to go the whole podcast about zoning, but not use the word zoning because it's a word that shuts people's brains down. So talk about apartment bans and housing choice. These are all the ways I take action: Twitter advocacy. I do go on Nextdoor neighborhood forums, land use parties. I hand out AARP's Making Room. I use change.org, Action Network. I do advocacy journalism. I give people homework assignments. You all are getting homework assignments. I'm gonna just go through this. This was a Twitter advocacy I did. There was the meme, how it started, how it's going. I did one with our redlining and our current zoning. That was a big hit on Twitter. Here's another one that was a big hit around condos versus a $10 million preserved home. Historic preservation is beautiful, but who is it for, right? And how is it hurting our cities across the whole country? So I love historic preservation, but also we have to acknowledge that it sometimes causes a lot of harm. Land use work parties. I know that we can't meet in person. I've been doing some land use work parties online, and you can make them fun. Try to make land use fun. It's a pretty serious subject. This was for backyard cottages at, this was a great, I love this picture. So this was a mom with her baby filling out the environmental impact statement for accessory dwelling units. So a lot of acronyms, the ADUEIS. And she had her baby there, and in the room was also her elderly mom, and she wanted to build a backyard cottage so her mom could come stay with them and they could live, the three of them, intergenerationally. And I love intergenerational organizing, and this was such a great moment where she's sitting there filling out the EIS with her baby, and the baby's like hanging out, learning how to do some land use advocacy. Loved it. I love advocacy journalism. A bunch of us, as part of Affordable Tulare, recently got this op-ed published that I recommend you read in the Puget Sound Business Journal. I tweeted out and said, does anyone have a connection to be able to publish in the Puget Sound Business Journal? And this person that follows me was like, yes. And so I was like, here's an op-ed, make it your own. And he published it. And yeah, so don't be afraid to like give your ideas away or share them with people. Like if someone has access to something, use it. Like don't be afraid to. And just started using Action Network, but doing petitions is great because you build your networks and your lists. And then this is kind of like, you can order a physical copy of this. So if you're a nonprofit housing provider and you want to like have a conversation internally about housing, I really recommend this resource. You can download a PDF, but you can also order a physical copy from AARP. Infographics, ideas, solutions, floor plans. It's a rallying cry for a wider menu of housing options, and I love it. The first 11 pages are like essential reading. Beautiful infographics about the demographics of our country and why we have a housing shortage and how we need to make zoning change. And again, they're not really using the word zoning, but everything they're talking about has to do with zoning. And this is your homework. It's probably about 6 months of reading. There's the HALA agenda, the Equity Environment Initiative, the final environmental impact statement for accessory dwelling units, which I love. Again, the first part of that really dives into our racist and exclusionary zoning history in Seattle. Nick Welch and some other folks worked on that at the Office of Planning and Community Development. And then if you really have a lot of time in your hands, the Seattle's land use code, you could read the whole thing if you wanted to. If you want to get real, if you want to become an expert. I have not read Seattle's land use code. I looked at it and got dizzy. I have not read the whole EIS for accessory dwelling units, but the beginnings are great. And the Equity Environment Initiative, I would read cover to cover. It really talks about green jobs. It was BIPOC led, and it really talks about how we can have an equitable, climate friendly city and an affordable city, and every kind of has all the ingredients in there for a holistic vision for the future of Seattle. And if you don't live in Seattle, all of this stuff I think is relevant. The HALA agenda is like 65 ways to get to affordability, and a lot of other cities have studied it and are kind of copying it. And you do want to get familiar with reading EIS's environmental impact statements. It's super annoying, but yeah. Action steps, 107. Okay, I can make it. Take action with Washington Can't Wait. Follow Housing Development Consortium and subscribe to their newsletter. They have action steps all the time around housing. Invite the Seattle Planning Commission to present to your local neighborhood association, planning commission, faith organization, union, or other group with their Neighborhoods for All report. Yeah, have them come out and do a presentation about that. It talks about why we need to rezone our city. And then last, but definitely not least, please follow and support the work of King County Equity Now. They are a coalition of coalitions, and they are doing a lot of stuff around equitable development and land use changes, and really great stuff around food sovereignty and food justice and just digital equity and so much more. And yeah, and I have a feedback form for all of you, but we can also do questions and answers. Oh, good. Emma posted the QKQED thing. Oops, I just sent that to Kieran, not everyone else. Okay, does anyone have questions for me? 6 minutes, I can do it. It could be like how to talk to your neighbors about zoning. It could be like, you know, tell me a story about the like meanest thing someone said to you in line at a zoning meeting.
Am I allowed to speak or?
Yeah, you can.
Okay. No, it's not so much a question, but there's something I forgot to mention in the breakout session. And what I find interesting is that where I grew up, which is Japan, they have no zoning like single family or commercial. So I grew up in a pretty big house. My father was a doctor, so I was a comfortable family. But then we were surrounded by apartments, condos, duplexes, and we all got along without any problem. We had friends and we had family, friends, and all that. So when I first came here and settled in a single family home, I was kind of surprised that there was no such thing as this different types of housing around me. It's all single houses. So just thought it would be very different depending upon where you are from. So.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm gonna echo what I said earlier to you about that, which is that when you're standing in line with somebody who's kind of on the opposite side of a zoning change, you know, sometimes I'll just start asking them random questions like, where do you like to go on vacation? Or like, what's the biggest city you've ever visited? Or have you ever lived car free? Or, you know, and you start talking to some of these people that are against zoning changes, and they go on vacation to like a fishing community, and they've never even visited San Francisco or Portland. And like, you start realizing that a lot of their fear is just because it's so unusual and unexpected, and they can't imagine anyone else living a different life than they live. And so it's really good to kind of dig into people and find out, like, where's their fear coming from? Like, is their fear about that they have bad ideas about low income folks, or bad ideas about renters, or you know, like, where exactly is it coming from? Is it generational trauma? Like, were they, you know, for Black folks in America, they've been lied to about by urban planners and by urbanists and by people talking about zoning and talking about, you know, urban renewal and all sorts of things. They've been lied to over and over and over again. So why should they trust a bunch of folks now from the city or from whoever that are like, we're going to rezone and everything's going to be better, right? Like, so you need to know where's the opposition coming from, and really like be a detective. So I don't like the word NIMBY, but it's the word that we have for the not in my backyard attitude of preventing zoning changes. But I like to say be a NIMBY detective, like find out exactly what is going on with this person that's standing in front of you, or this person you're fighting with on Nextdoor, or this person you're fighting with on Twitter, or it could be your mom and dad, right? Like my dad said to me one time about Santa Monica, I've been paying taxes for 30 years. I should get more of a say than a renter, right? So I should get more of a say over the land use decisions in my city because I pay taxes. And so there's just like a lot to break down there with that individual person about, well, actually, you know, renters pay property taxes too through our rents. And like, why is that fair that you've been here 30 years so you get more of a say? Like if someone just got here and they're going to be here for the next 30 years and you're about to move out of town, that doesn't make sense. Like if they're about to live here for the next 30 years and you're about to move out of town, like, shouldn't they get more of a say? Like if we're really thinking about it. So it's just, it's a lot of really have a lot of one-on-one conversations and know when to break it off into chunks. Like you're not going to convince people that are angry about rezones in one conversation. And sometimes you're never going to change their mind. And that's okay. That doesn't mean you failed. You just need to like kind of do broader education and get new people thinking about this. So if somebody is an expert on gardening, you know, try to tie in zoning into that interest or whatever they're interested in. Anyone have any other questions? We've got 2 minutes left till 1:15. Emma, I don't know if you want to say any upcoming events for Affordable Housing Week people should know about.
Yeah, I'll drop it in the chat too. We have 2 more events today. One is kind of geared towards transit-oriented development and equitable transit-oriented development. And that'll be really interesting. And then there's also a Know Your Rights training for tenants, given all the like different legislation that's been done for evictions and renters right now. We have like the East Side Legal Assistance Program will help run you through that and make sure tenants know what they need to know. And then I'll also send out our full-on Affordable Housing Week schedule too.
Awesome. So yeah, Housing Development Consortium does a lot of rad work, and it's good to work in coalition, and I appreciate them supporting me as kind of like an independent grassroots advocate, because we need big nonprofits to kind of like connect to people that are doing work in weird ways, because not every message is going to work for every person. Not every messenger is going to work for every person. Like I might be a really good messenger for other 44-year-old renters, right? But I may not be the best messenger for other folks, right? So you really need to think about who your messengers are for any advocacy you're doing, and like who's going to listen to that person and who's not going to listen to that person. And yeah, and really think about taking some time downloading the audiobook or reading Color of Law to kind of understand the historical harm, the deep harm that was done through state-sponsored segregation, through police violence around enforcing that segregation, and through legal methods to enforce that. And our schools in our city are more segregated across the country than they've ever been, and that has big outcomes for us. You know, it's not just about affordable cities and affordable communities. Like it's also about having fair cities and just cities, and a right to the city, and who has a right to all of the beautiful amenities in a city. So yeah, so that's kind of my soapbox. So thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate all of you, and yeah. And I'm sorry if I'm a jerk on Twitter. I promise I'm nice in real life. you gotta like get your fists up on Twitter sometimes. So
Thank you.
thank you everyone. Have a great day. Reach
Thank you,
out.
Lola. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Send me an email, anyone. Bye.